Winston Churchill said in 1950, "War is mostly a catalogue of mistakes." On Sunday, June 22, 1941, while the sun was sleeping, 3.6 million soldiers, 2,000 warplane pilots, and 3,350 tank commanders were huddled at the border of Soviet-occupied Poland, ready to attack the communist country that Joseph Stalin had brutally ruled for years. An Axis force of 3 million people attacked Soviet positions along a 900-mile front just after 3 a.m. in an action Adolf Hitler called Barbarossa. German planes attacked military bases, supply depots, and towns all along the border, such as Sevastopol on the Black Sea and Brest in Belarus. German commandos sneaked into Soviet land the night before and hacked into Red Army networks in the west, making it hard for those who were being attacked to get orders from Moscow. About 1,200 Soviet planes had been destroyed by the end of the first day of fighting. 2/3 of them were while they were parked on the ground. The Soviet troops, who were not killed or taken, gave up when the Germans attacked. The German surprise attack scared Stalin. Hitler and Stalin had signed a non-aggression pact less than 2 years before Germany's surprise act of war. This breach of that pact put the Soviet Union's very life at risk. At first, Stalin said it was just a joke caused by some bad German generals. He wouldn't order a counterattack until he heard from Berlin publicly. After 4 hours, the German declaration of war finally came. Hitler was okay with Barbarossa because the Soviet Union was about to attack Germany from the rear. After hemming and hawing, Stalin finally told the Red Army to use all their strength and means to come down on the enemy's forces and destroy them where they have violated the Soviet border. However, he also told the troops on the ground not to cross the border until further orders were given. It was clear that Stalin didn't want to tell the Russian people that the Germans had invaded. Minister of Foreign Affairs Vyacheslav Molotov had to do that unpleasant job. He told the world about the attack on the radio more than 8 hours after the conflict started. Sadly, bombs and bullets from the Axis had already told millions of people about the disaster. Even though his military officers urged him to, Stalin refused to become commander-in-chief of the Red Army because he was afraid he would be blamed for the deaths. On that terrible day, he didn't even meet with the Politburo until 2 p.m. The shocked Red Army moved slowly and scaredly because it didn't have enough skilled military leadership. The Germans attacked from the east and badly hurt the Soviet troops. Stalin's generals asked for permission to withdraw to save lives, take defensive positions, and get ready for a counterattack. Stalin said no. His troops, who weren't well trained, equipped, or led, were told to stand their ground no matter what. The Germans moved 300 miles into Soviet land in the first 10 days of the war and took Minsk and more than 400,000 Red Army soldiers. 140,000 Russian forces died every day. The Axis took over almost all of the airspace and destroyed 90% of Stalin's mechanized troops. 20 million people who were living in Soviet Union were all of a sudden living in Axis land. Many people in places that Stalin had attacked before, like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, at first saw the Germans as liberators and welcomed them. Stalin looked like he was about to lose it, because the losses were so embarrassing. The leader of the country, even though he was the leader of the government, went to his summer home and drank a lot. He refused to answer his phone or do anything else related to the country's business for several rainy days in June, leaving the ship of state to float hopelessly. On June 28th, he said, "Lenin left us a great legacy, but we, his heirs, have ******* added up." On June 30th, senior Soviet leaders got up the courage to visit Stalin's dacha. They found him sad and messy when they got there. His voice was tense as he asked, "Why are you here?" Stalin seemed to believe that his employees were there to catch him. They were scared for a long time because of the dictator's brutal threats, so they just begged him to go back to work at the Kremlin. He did it in the end. Without a doubt, Hitler's hate of communism and desire to rule the world led to Operation Barbarossa. But Stalin's many mistakes over the past 2 years led Hitler to attack and were a big part of Barbarossa's early victories. Stalin made a lot of mistakes, like getting rid of the leaders of the Soviet military, signing a treaty with Hitler that started a world war that destroyed Russia, attacking Finland in a bad way in late 1939, misreading Hitler, choosing a bad plan to attack Germany, and ignoring warnings that Hitler was about to invade the Soviet Union with the Axis powers. Stalin tried to bring down capitalist governments all over Europe to help Lenin reach his goal of starting a communist revolution around the world. He wanted to kill anyone in the United States or abroad who stood in the way of his style of communism. "There will always be wreckers, spies, saboteurs, and killers among us," Stalin said. In a speech in 1937, the man of steel, that's what Stalin means in Russian, made his harsh stance clear. Anyone who tries to destroy the unity of the socialist state, who aims to separate any of its parts or nationalities from it, is an enemy, a sworn enemy of the state and of the peoples of the USSR. And all of these attackers will be killed, no matter if they are old Bolsheviks or not. We are going to kill all of their relatives and family members. Stalin's way of thinking led to the Great Terror, during which millions of Soviet citizens were arrested for counter-revolutionary crimes or anti-Soviet agitation. Between 1937 and 1938, at least 1.3 million people were found guilty of being anti-Soviet elements, and more than half of them were put to death by shooting, with an average of 1,500 people being killed every day. During the Great Terror, Stalin got rid of possible threats in the Soviet forces. He took out of service about 34,000 Red Army leaders. Out of those, 22,705 were killed or went missing. Stalin arrested 91 and shot 80 of the 101 people in charge of the Red Army. In the Soviet Navy, 8 of the 9 top admirals were killed. By 1939, he had pretty much cut off the heads of the military forces that were supposed to protect the Soviet Union from attack. Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf, published in 1925, made it clear that he was strongly against Marxism and that Germany needed to take over more land to give its people more living space. Hitler was clear that one source of these kinds of lands would be Russia and her vassal border states. After Hitler took power in Germany in 1933, the Nazi policies he put in place were a direct attack on Stalin's communism. Over the next 6 years, Germany's military power and desire to expand rapidly grew at an alarming rate, even though the Versailles Treaty basically said that Germany couldn't get stronger weapons. Hitler grew Germany by taking over Austria in 1938 and a lot of Czechoslovakia in the beginning of 1939. Then his eyes went to Poland, which is right next door. Stalin was right to be worried about Hitler's plan to take over Ukraine and other rich lands to the east of Germany. He knew that the Soviet Union and its Red Army were not ready for war in the late 1930s. He could buy time and try to curb Hitler's desire to attack by making a deal with Great Britain and France, 2 countries that have always been enemies of Germany, or by trying to make a peace pact with Hitler. Stalin began talking with France and Great Britain about a pact in early 1939. The goal was to make sure that Hitler would have enemies to the east and west of Germany. However, these efforts were slowed down because France and Great Britain did not want to sign a treaty with a communist country that wanted to weaken capitalist democracies, especially one led by a cruel and unpredictable dictator like Stalin. The talks went back and forth. A few months later, Hitler quietly asked Stalin to talk about a non-aggression pact, the so-called Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, after the foreign ministers of the 2 countries, in order to stop a treaty between Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Hitler made a deal with Stalin so that Germany wouldn't have to deal with an enemy army to the east, because he was planning a secret attack on Poland in the late summer. Both France and Great Britain had agreed to defend Poland. Hitler and Stalin shocked the world in late August 1939, when they said that their countries had agreed to trade and not attack each other. Hitler secretly promised Stalin that the 2 countries would invade Poland and split it up, and that Germany would help Stalin take over Latvia, Estonia, Bessarabia, and parts of Finland. Nazi Germany kept his word. Stalin told the Politburo on August 19th that his deal with Hitler was a good idea because the question of war and peace has entered a critical phase for us. How it will be solved is completely dependent on what the Soviet Union does. We are sure that if we make a deal with France and Great Britain to help each other, Germany will stop attacking Poland and try to find a way to get along with the Western powers. There would be no war, but other things could happen that would be bad for the USSR. On the other hand, if we agree to Germany's offer and sign a non-aggression pact with her, she will definitely invade Poland, and France and England will have to step in. There would be a lot of chaos and upheaval in Western Europe. In this case, we will have a great chance to stay out of the war, and we can plan when it would be best for us to join. The last 20 years have shown that the Bolshevik Party can never take power when the communist movement is weak or not in power. Someone from that party will only be able to rule through a big war, Stalin continued. Comrades, I have given you my thoughts. I say it again. A fight between the Reich and the capitalist Anglo-French bloc is good for the USSR, which is the home of the workers. In order to weaken both sides, everything should be done to make it last as long as possible. Because of this, we must all agree to sign the pact that Germany has offered and then work to make sure that this war lasts as long as possible once it starts. So on August 23, 1939, the cold-blooded anti-capitalist leader who wanted to Sovietize the world slept with the cold-blooded anti-Bolshevik leader who wanted fascist rule over the whole world. More than 1 million German soldiers came into Poland from the West on September 1, 1939. 16 days later, 500,000 Soviet troops attacked Poland from the east, as agreed upon in the secret August Pact between Stalin and Hitler. Within weeks, Poland was no longer a country. After taking over its land, Germany and the Soviet Union shared a border and were both blamed for starting World War II. In late November 1939, Stalin ordered about 1 million Red Army soldiers to invade Finland, a country with only 3.6 million people. Before 1918, Finland was ruled by Russia, but the anti-Bolsheviks won a civil war there. During the 4 months of harsh winter fighting against brave and defiant resistance, more than 200,000 Red Army soldiers died. Nikita Khrushchev said in his memoirs that the number was closer to 1 million, many more than the Finns' military deaths. Stalin made Finland give up some land as part of a ceasefire because he was embarrassed. However, the small amount of land that the Soviet Union gained was not worth the huge number of lives that were lost. The Soviet Union was kicked out of the League of Nations because it attacked Finland for no reason. Hitler thought that Soviet forces were weak because Stalin had recently fired many of his military chiefs, and the Red Army did badly in Finland. This made Hitler think about attacking the USSR without warning. By 1940, Stalin was deeply aware that the Red Army lacked leadership, weapons, soldiers, infrastructure, training, and a plan for how to fight the war. He told everyone in charge to speed up a huge upgrade of the troops, but this would take time, and until then, care would need to be taken not to make Hitler want to attack Russia. In the first half of 1940, the German troops swept through Belgium, Denmark, Norway, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and France, embarrassing the British and forcing them to retreat back to their island from the rest of Europe. This made Stalin very uncomfortable. The Soviet leader thought that the Western European countries would eventually wear each other out in a long war, which would be good for communism in the long run. These quick wins did not fit with this idea. As part of their trade deals, the Soviet Union sent Germany huge amounts of food, raw materials, and oil. They also bought goods from other countries that Hitler needed but couldn't get because Great Britain had a naval blockade of German ports. In a strange twist, by the middle of 1940, Germany's most important trade partner was the Soviet Union. At that time, Stalin thought that Hitler wanted to take over land in the east because Germany needed more food and natural resources. So Stalin thought that if the Soviet Union met a lot of Hitler's needs for basic goods, the chance of a German attack soon would go down. Stalin knew that the Germans were going to attack the Soviet Union at some point. He thought, though, that Hitler would wait to attack until after Britain had given up. He thought the British would be able to hold out until at least the middle of 1942. He also thought that Hitler would give Stalin land and resources before fighting the USSR, and that Stalin would have time to respond to Hitler's ultimatum with a concession, an attack before it was even planned, or at least a move to defensive military positions. In secret, Stalin thought about having the Red Army attack Germany without warning in 1942 during the summer of 1940. He hoped that by that time the Red Army would be better because its officers would have more experience and the army would have been updated. He also hoped that Germany would be weaker because it was still fighting Great Britain. In line with what he told the Politburo in August 1939, Stalin thought that if Germany fell, the Red Army would have an easy way to invade capitalist Europe and spread communism there. He told a few of the best generals to secretly write up war plans. Stalin wasn't sure when or if to start a preemptive strike in October 1940 after looking over a number of proposals. However, plans for such an attack kept going. In July 1940, Hitler asked his generals to make secret plans for a surprise attack by Germany on the Soviet Union. The Führer wanted to get rid of Jewish Bolshevism, take over land and natural resources in the East, kill the Stalinist threat, and make it impossible for the USSR to help Great Britain. Hitler asked the Soviet Union to join Germany, Italy, and Japan in the tripartite pact in November 1940. The treaty said that all three countries would work together if they went to war with the United States. The German tyrant also tried to get the Soviet dictator to focus on expanding his territory in the Middle East instead of Eastern Europe. The talks failed because Stalin wanted land in Europe and Hitler wanted to pull Axis troops out of Finland. Because of these differences, Hitler was sure that his country and Stalin's would have to fight. Hitler had already decided what he wanted to do by December 18, 1940. He told his generals to make specific plans for a war that would start in May 1941 and crush Soviet Russia in a rapid campaign. This plan was codenamed Operation Barbarossa. Around the same time, Stalin told the Red Army to build armed walls along the border between Germany and the Soviet Union. When finished, these would help in a Soviet attack that was planned ahead of time but hurt in a defensive battle started by a German blitzkrieg. According to military convention, these kinds of fortifications should be set back from the border so that troops, artillery, and weapons wouldn't be quickly destroyed or captured in case of a surprise attack. This would also give the defensive military forces room to move. By the time spring came around in 1941, Stalin still hadn't decided if or when to attack Germany first. But his generals kept getting ready for such an attack. Hitler took steps in 1941 to protect his southern side against an attack during the war he was planning against Soviet Russia. He also got Bulgaria and Yugoslavia to join the tripartite pact. As early as April, a civil war broke out in Yugoslavia. He sent troops to put down the rebellion. In the same month, his troops also went into Greece to save an Italian operation that had gone badly there. Hitler had to delay the start of Operation Barbarossa because of these short military actions. The date was changed to June 22nd. Stalin was happy to say in April 1941 that the Soviet Union and Japan had made a deal not to attack each other. This made it much less likely that the East would attack the USSR militarily, which let Stalin focus on Germany. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy Führer, flew alone to the British Isles and parachuted into Scotland on May 10th to try to make peace between Germany and Great Britain. Hitler did not know about or agree with Hess's escape, so the British caught him. But Stalin was suspicious and believed in conspiracies. He was afraid that if Hess really was on a secret mission to bring peace to Germany and end the war with Britain, Germany would attack the USSR more often. On May 15th, Stalin's top generals gave him a new preemptive attack plan. They said, "It is necessary to deprive the German command of all initiative, to preempt the enemy, and to attack." The generals suggested that troops, planes, and other equipment be sent to the western border under the guise of training exercises. Stalin wanted to take the initiative because he was worried about what Hess was doing in England, knew that Germany was gathering troops at his border, and thought that the first country to attack would probably win. He chose to move the Soviet attack from 1942 to the summer of that year, according to some scholars. Stalin had told graduates of the Red Army Military School just a few days before, "Our military policy must change from defense to offensive actions." He then sped up the production of planes and other military gear, added almost 1 million more men to the army, and started moving millions of Red Army soldiers and their supplies west so that they would be in place by July 10th. Stalin tried to hide his huge military buildup near the border between Germany and the Soviet Union so as not to give Hitler a reason to attack first. Rumors of a Russian buildup were called totally fantastic by Soviet media, which said that the troops were just training. But Stalin repeatedly turned down his generals' requests to put those Western Red Army men on combat alert, because he was afraid it would make Germany attack. "You must understand that Germany will never attack Russia on its own," he told them. "If you provoke the Germans on the border or move forces without our permission, remember that heads will roll." Stalin was more likely to be attacked by the Axis before they even got there in 1941 because, after moving into Poland in 1939, the Soviets had taken down their old border defenses but hadn't finished building new ones at the more western border. Another issue was that the military stores and warplanes Stalin had ordered to be moved to the new border before the planned preemptive strike could now be captured or destroyed by an Axis attack that came out of the blue. His military's communication methods were also very basic, and he couldn't move troops and equipment quickly by road or rail. A lot of his tools were also old and useless. Finally, Stalin didn't have a plan B for how the USSR would protect itself if Germany attacked first. The United States, Great Britain, and other countries learned about Germany's secret plan to attack the USSR in the first half of 1941. There was no love for communism in Winston Churchill's heart when he sent Stalin an attack warning in April. In a similar message, President Franklin Roosevelt warned people. Stalin also got invasion signals from Soviet spies living outside of Russia, more Axis troops on the border, repeated German air raids on Soviet land, and the fact that many German officials and their families started to leave Moscow. But Stalin, who was always suspicious of other people's intentions, shot down all of these fears. Even though Germany was only fighting a weak enemy at the time, Great Britain, the Soviet leader was still sure that Hitler would not be stupid enough to start a war on two fronts in the first half of 1941. Stalin knew that any German blitzkrieg that was likely to work would have to start by midsummer because of the hard Russian winter and the mud season in the fall. So, he thought that he would be able to fight first if Russia could avoid an immediate attack. Stalin's worries about internal dangers and traitors came back to the surface in early June. Once more, he got rid of 300 officers from the top of the Red Army. Among them were more than 20 officers who had won the country's highest military honor. Because of this, about 3/4 of his field officers had only been in their jobs for 2 years or less. There was a strange radio broadcast on June 14, 1941, from the Kremlin that said British rumors of a German attack on the USSR were an obvious absurdity and a clumsy propaganda maneuver of the forces arrayed against the Soviet Union and Germany. This statement upset Stalin's remaining generals because it went against their efforts to get ready for the war that was quickly developing at the border. The USSR suddenly lost control of a port on June 19th, and 25 German ships left. This made Stalin more worried. Within a month, he told them to hide his planes over the western border, but he wouldn't let him put his troops on battle alert. On June 21st, the day before the planned blitzkrieg, Stalin told his diplomats to call Germany's foreign minister and ask why so many German troops were gathered on the border with Russia. He wanted to make sure that Hitler would keep his end of the non-aggression deal. Throughout the day, Ribbentrop's team refused to believe that the German diplomat was not available. Late that night, when asked about rumors that the Axis powers were about to attack, Germany's minister to the USSR just said he didn't know what to say. Also that night, a German who had escaped told an officer in the Red Army that the blitzkrieg would start the next morning. Stalin became scared. Hitler could really attack first. But the Soviet ruler didn't always act the same way. It was possible for the Germans to attack on June 22nd or 23. He told his field generals to move their troops closer to the border and be very alert. At the same time, Stalin told them to be smart and avoid big complications, like war, and not to yield to any provocation from the Germans. Did this mean they should take an Axis blow and not fight back? Stalin didn't say anything else and then went home for the night. A few hours later, Operation Barbarossa began, and it was a terrible blow to the Soviets. Both sides were getting ready to fight first, but Hitler attacked first, which caught the Soviets off guard. There were almost 4 million Axis soldiers from Germany, Italy, Hungary, Romania, Finland, Slovakia, and Croatia, along with 3,350 tanks, 7,200 pieces of artillery, 2,770 warplanes, and 700,000 horses pulling wagons. They crashed across a front that stretched 1,800 miles, from the border between East Prussia and Lithuania on the Baltic Sea to the border between Romania and Ukraine on the Black Sea. It was amazing how fast, big, and cruel the Axis attack was. The advancing Axis troops tore apart Soviet units that were badly outnumbered and poorly led. There would be 5 million Red Army prisoners, and most of them would not make it through the war. Operational groups, or Einsatzgruppen, were Nazi death teams that went through the lands they had just taken over to find and kill Jews in towns and villages. Stalin made a lot of mistakes that led to the destruction. It took Stalin at least 2 weeks longer than planned to attack Hitler than he had planned. Many people had warned the Soviet ruler about a German blitzkrieg, but he didn't listen. Before that, he had turned down a deal with France and Great Britain that, as he told the Politburo, would have stopped World War II and most likely the attack in June 1941. Stalin put his battle supplies and unmarked warplanes too close to the German border. He also didn't build a good military transportation system and tore down the fortifications at the old Soviet border without building any new ones. The Red Army didn't have good defenses ready in case the enemy attacked without warning. Stalin didn't order a full and instant counterattack early on June 22nd, and he then wouldn't let the Allies make a strategic retreat. Because he cut off the heads of the Red Army, he had weak and untrained leaders in battle. The first steps of the German attack were shockingly successful, leaving Stalin depressed, messy, and drunk. But Stalin continued to have good luck in his personal life. Although Stalin brutally got rid of all opposition within the Communist Party, killed and starved millions of Soviets and jailed millions more, messed up plans for war with Hitler, and went into depression-stricken hiding for a few days after Hitler's attack, his weak subordinates did not do to him in late June what he would have done to them if the roles had been switched. They did not arrest, torture, jail, or shoot him dead by firing squad. In late June, Stalin was also lucky that Japan, which was very angry with Hitler, didn't follow through on his orders and attacked the Soviet Union from the east, while Barbarossa came from the west. And even though Stalin's plot with Hitler started World War II and years of important communist help for the Axis forces, Stalin was saved by 2 capitalist countries that were against communism in the summer of 1941, when he was most vulnerable. The United States and Great Britain sent food and military supplies that saved Stalin's life while he was under attack, but Stalin didn't want to admit it. Hitler put off his attack of the Soviet Union by 5 weeks so that he could put down uprisings in Yugoslavia and Greece. This was also good for Stalin. The late Axis march on Moscow was stopped by snow and very cold weather in December, just a few miles from the Russian city. Things might have turned out very differently if they had begun earlier. Barbarossa was finally beaten, but it took 4 years and the deaths of tens of millions of people. People in the Soviet Union paid a terrible price in death and damage for Stalin's many mistakes because they didn't have his good luck.